All right. It was really fun getting to prepare for this Torah portion. Korah, as Mr. Stapleton brought out here. The first thing I noticed as I was beginning to read through it is that there are about 14 different ways in English that you can spell Korah. So I tried very hard to get them all spelled the same as I went through what I put in here. It starts with a Q-U, with a K, with an H in the end. Some have an O, some don't. So it was very interesting. The next thing I noticed, and we actually looked at this last Shabbat as we were talking about it with my father, was that this is my birthday portion. I don't know if you knew that. I had celebrated my birthday a couple weeks ago, but this would have been the portion that I would have done had I been bar mitzvahed. And as such, I don't know how much significance that has in the Hebrew culture. But let me tell you, as I read through this, there were so many different things that touched me on such a deep and spiritual level that frankly today I didn't know where to start. It was every little piece in here had some sort of significance to some point in my life. And I hope to share with you guys the significance that it can have in your life and where we start on our journey towards changing our heart condition. And I say changing our heart condition because I think that is the point of this whole Torah portion. And as we go through it, we're going to talk about a lot of different people. But in each case, it was their heart condition that caused the problem. And for us today, and I can certainly say in my own life, as I read, and there were parts of this, and it's like you start to cringe, and you get that, ooh, I've been there feel. I know what that feels like. Your heart condition determines how you will be when you stand before your King, and it's a choice that we make daily and hourly, and sometimes even every minute. So let's take a look, and the first thing I put up here is, who was he? I mean, you went into it a little bit. Is who is Korah? So I started to take a look at it, and I wanted to put this up here so that we can see the first verse, which is where we get the name of our Torah portion from, and it says, "Now Korah, the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, with Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and On." So we have Dathan and Abiram, those are characters, and Korah. And On are the sons of Peleth, son of Reuben. Reuben, he was the firstborn of Leah. I'm going to put this chart up here so we can see it real quick. So we go back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. On the top we have Jacob there, that is Israel, and he had his 12 sons. Now Dathan and Abiram, we can see down here on the left, were the sons of Reuben. Now, why is that important? I mean, they could have been anybody. Why is that important? Sons of the firstborn. That is exactly right. Reuben was the firstborn. And that started a fight way back long before. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But back in Jacob's days, because he didn't inherit firstborn status. Because of something he did, but we're going to get into that a little bit later. But he did not inherit the firstborn status because of his heart condition, because of his sin, because of the choices that he made. So we see his grandsons down here. We got a couple of generations have gone by, are still going to suffer with the same sin of their grandfather. But enough about them. Let's talk about Korah. Korah's over here on the other side. Korah, we come down, Levi, so he's of the priesthood, or of the service of the temple. We have the Kohath, which is the section we learned a couple of weeks ago, which is the section that we're actually in charge of the priesthood. And then we have the firstborn of Kohath. We have, over here in the middle, Amram, who is actually the father of Aaron and Moses. So Aaron and Moses would have been the firstborn line as you follow it back from Levi, who was chosen by God to run the priesthood, right? Back to Mount Sinai. So we got all that. So these weren't just anybody's. These were people that were in positions of authority, But see, Korah over here, he was the son of the second-born. So he never would have been in a position to be in the priesthood. So that's going to give us a setup point to understand what's going to happen next. And they rose up, verse 2, and they rose up before Moses with certainty of the children of Israel, 250 princes of the congregation, called to the assembly men of renown. So again, these weren't just any men, they were princes of the congregation. There were 250 who stood up with Korah, who said, we recognize that what you're trying to lead us, the direction that you're trying to lead us, is the way that we're going to go. We're going to listen to your voice and we're going to follow you because we respect the position. Go back to his position. He's not just a nobody. We respect your position within our community and we're going to agree with you. So let's see what happened next. And they assembled themselves together against Moses and Aaron. Heart condition. Remember, this is where we're going to start to see what was in their hearts. This is where what's in their hearts is going to start coming out through their mouths. And that's a very interesting place to be. And I know it's a place that's gotten me into a lot of trouble a lot of times in my life. So let's see. And they assembled themselves against Moses and against Aaron. And they said unto them, you take too much upon you, seeing as all the congregation are holy, every one of them. And Jehovah, Yahweh, is among them. His tent is here among us. We see him every day. Wherefore then, lift ye up yourselves, or why then do you lift yourself up above the assembly of Jehovah? Why then do you consider yourself special? Now, we've seen Moses deal with this kind of thing before, and this is the thing that I love. I don't know if I put it up here. Let's see. No, I didn't. We see in Moses' heart condition immediately. We've seen it before. What did he do last time? He threw himself down on the ground before God, and he says, this is something I don't feel quite qualified to deal with. I'm going to go back and talk to my master. So we know Moses' heart. But I wanted to look real quick at this little phrase, all the congregation are holy. Now, that in itself is a true statement. All the congregation has been chosen by the king to be his set-apart nation, to be his group of people who he will set apart within the rule, within the whole universe, to be an example. Now, what do we see back a few chapters? We saw that they were to be an example to all the world, that by following his law, that the whole world would look around at him, at them, and recognize what an awesome, what a powerful, what a just, what a righteous king served over them. They didn't even see him. So that's true. Now there's a little problem because he was using that little phrase to twist and to misdirect not only those 250, but you got to remember what they said about those 250 men. What did they say about those 250 men? They were princes of the congregation. So if we take Lance Stapleton over here, Don Kennedy, all Roman, we pick the men of this congregation that stand up, Howard, and we take those men. Who do you think the people in this congregation are following? If we got a group of those men together, do you think that this congregation would follow them? Most likely, I would say yes. Anybody that was under them, their kids, the other people, we're going to follow them because we say, well, if they're going that way, I'm going to go that way too because I respect them. I've seen them over the years. The problem was Korah's heart was not in the right place. And we're going to discover a little bit further along what had happened to his heart. And you stole some of my stuff already. I wasn't worried. I knew you were going to do it as soon as you started talking. I wasn't worried. The sin of presumption. Korah's problem was that he thought he was all that in a bag of chips. He did not recognize his position within the community. He began to resent Aaron and Moses. And I'm sure he sat quite a few nights in his house going, doggone it, Moses and Aaron, they get all the fun, and I'm really getting tired of it. And so he just dwelt on it. Isn't that how sin starts? Just gets with a little thought somewhere, and it does this over there, and then you sit there and you think about it. I know that that's how it's been in my life. I know that the times that I choose to let myself dwell on something that's gone wrong in my life are the time that little seed begins to grow and get out of control. And pretty soon I find myself doing things that I never thought I would do because I didn't recognize what it was. And that's why I'm going to say it again. Your heart condition matters. We're going to keep coming back to that little phrase. Your heart condition matters. His resentment or his heart condition came from a spirit of covetousness. He thought that he could displace Moses as the person who represented the people before God. Now, let's go back to our genealogy here. Even from the genealogy, we know that he will never be able to fulfill that role. I'm sure Levi actually didn't think he was initially going to be able to fulfill that role either, did he? He said, I know it'll go to Reuben. But guess what? Reuben did not have the heart condition, did not live in a way that allowed him to fulfill the role that he had been given. Did that mean Levi could look at the situation and go, well, I guess I'm never going to be in the line for things, so I'm just going to live any way I want. I can do anything I want, right? Because I'm never going to be in that position. No. Levi was elevated to position because of his heart condition. When he was standing before the mountain, when the children of Levi were standing before the mountain, they stood up for the promises of God against their brothers even and said, no, we are going to follow God and we are going to go against our brothers who have chosen to do the wrong thing because we love Yahweh with our whole heart. Heart condition. So let's go back to the sin of presumption. He thought he would replace Moses as a person who would be face to face before Yahweh, which is the high priest's position. He thought he was going to be the high priest. As such, he would have had the authority to govern all Israel, which is really what he wanted. He was after power. So, I wrote down a very long definition, or I didn't write it down, I copied it, of the definition of presumption. Let me tell you, this was the hardest part for me, because I was reading through this, and my heart says, oop, been there, done that. Oop, been there, done that. And I'm sure it'll be the same for you. And you know, when you were talking about the kids here a few minutes ago when they were here under the hoopah, aren't we so blessed to have a God who rules over us, who gives us a time under the hoopah, who gives us a season of mercy, a season of learning, a time that we can have that blessing of being without the consequence, because we'll have an earthly Father who can stand over us and protect us and say, no, I see that promise that you made and I break it down. I take your word back. You don't have the authority to make that decision. Now, there is a day when we are accountable for our own actions before our Heavenly Father. But you know, even in that day, and Tom said this the other week, and it struck so deep into my heart, Tom Ackerman. He said, we have a husband today as a bride. As men of our congregations, we stand and are accountable for our decisions. But as we stand as men, as brides to our Heavenly Father, we also have a bridegroom who at any time is capable of breaking a promise that we have made. Even as men, we are also brides, and we have someone over us who is able to say, nope, that decision you made, not today. I break that. I have the authority to do that as your bridegroom, as your husband. And so that just gave me a sense that as a wife, as a bride of my King, that I was so grateful that I was able to submit to his authority, and in submitting to his authority, that he would love me in a way that would break my sins, the things that I had done wrong. So, the definition of presumption. To suppose that something is the case on the basis of probability before there's any proof. It means you don't have proof for what you're trying to say. You just suppose that it's true. To take the case for granted that something exists or is the case. To be arrogant or impertinent enough to say, that was Korah's sin there. He says, I think I deserve to be priest. That's what he told Moses. And Moses said, oh, wait a second here. To say something, to make an unjustified demand, or to take liberties to do something, to unjustifiably regard something as entitled, as entitling one to superior privileges. That means we were talking about that today, and I know we mentioned them, and it's been on the news that they're considering Black Lives Matter a terrorist group. But to me, it comes back to a human group. Anyone who unjustifiably regards themselves as having more importance than another person is committing this sin. And that's why I thought that was so interesting, or hard in my heart. It made my heart break to see that happening this week, because of a group that their motto and their heart is that we are superior. It's the same sin. We are superior to another group. This is their motto. They unjustifiably regard themselves as entitled to superior privileges. We are all the same. There is no one of us who deserves more or deserves less. And anyone who would say, I deserve more, we're going to question their heart condition every time. I know that I take a step back now that I'm beginning to learn this, because I recognize that it is one of the sins that I've had to deal with so much in my own life. And the consequences that I've had to take, because now as an adult, I stand and I look at that, the consequences. The consequences for the shooter was death. It's a tough consequence. I don't want to put myself in a place where the consequence could be death. Now, you notice that word unjustifiably. We go back to Moses, the person he was trying to replace. Moses had a position. Was he more holy, more set apart than Korah? He was first of the firstborn line instead of the secondborn line. God certainly gave that position honor. But was he more holy? That's a discussion that I decided not to get into today. But I did want to bring it up only to say that each position within the body, and Paul makes this very clear, and we'll talk about that later also, each position within the body is important and has a very important value. And so to dismiss one portion as more important than another is going to have a consequence. If the tribe of Reuben didn't have Dathan and Abiram as leadership positions over them, their tribes would have been in chaos. They would not have been able to move out on time within the group as they were traveling or anything else. Their positions had value. God gave their positions value. It's only when we begin to try to take a position that is not ours, and that's why we go back to unjustifiably. Unjustifiable. You are unable to justify your position. That's when we get into trouble. Behavior perceived as arrogant, disrespectful, conceited, insolent, transgressing the limits of what is permitted or appropriate. To assume a position that is not rightfully yours. Takes for granted or makes up fictitious accounts or stories to appear like that's what Korah did. He said, and he started telling the people, we're all holy. That's what he said. Let's go back. All the congregation is holy. That's what he said. All the congregation is holy. Why do you consider yourselves as more important than me? The spirit of presumption is self or opinionated, makes up its own opinions, audacious, vain, overbearing, overconfident, likes to be the center of attention, can sometimes be crude for the purpose of getting attention, brash, conceited, pompous, stuck up, pretentious, prideful, self-important, insecure, self-centered, disrespectful, rude, flippant, have false humility, put on airs, be persuasive, trying to persuade people to their own ideas, suspicious, controlling, manipulative, non-repentant, arrogant, self-worshiping, superior, egotistical, and aloof. Woo! I checked a few of those along the way for me, but I wanted to come back to this one more time. Just to say, I put it in there because I wanted to go back and say what I already went back to the other one. His genealogy showed that he definitely did not have the position in God's tree to hold the position that he was desiring to hold. It says, now Korah and the son of Issachar, the son of Levi, with Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab and On, the sons of Peleth and Reuben. We already talked about that. They were from the other side. We see them over there, of the firstborn. I wanted to go back to see why they got into so much trouble. Genesis 35, we're jumping back to Reuben. What got him into trouble? What his heart condition was. And it came to pass, from Genesis 35:22, while Israel dwelt in that land, that Reuben went out and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard about it. So we can definitely see his heart condition in the same sin that we're now seeing Korah, not respecting the family order by going and sleeping with one of his father's wives. That's a pretty big disrespect against your father. So we understand what was in Reuben's heart, and that carried down to have consequences to his children. And we see that a few generations later when his grandsons were the ones standing up with Korah in this rebellion. So, where else have we heard this same sin? I wanted to bring out a few of them because as soon as I began to read this section, the first thing that I recognized was that this was not a sin that just started here. This is not the first time we've seen this sin. And many of the commentaries that I began reading started comparing it back to Jezebel and a spirit of Jezebel, and I'm going to choose not to go down that rabbit trail either. But I just wanted to mention it in passing that there is definitely a spiritual connection, a demonic connection to this sin. And it gets its fingers, it gets its claws into you. And unless there's an intentional breaking of this spirit in your heart, it is very difficult to change your heart condition. So let's see another person who suffered with this same heart condition. Going back to Genesis chapter 4, almost the beginning of the book, second Torah portion that we study. And the man knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man with the help of Yahweh. And again she bore his brother Abel, and Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. So we see that Cain was a tiller of the ground, Abel was a sheep. Now that doesn't say anything in his heart condition by itself. We're going to see that in a minute. And in the process of time, it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto Jehovah. And Abel, he also brought of the firstlings of his flock, and the fat thereof. And Yahweh had respect unto Abel and to his offering, but unto Cain and to his offering he had not respect. And Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. Now, as we begin to study some of the other Levitical sacrifices, we do see them bringing grain. So if Cain was bringing grain, what's the problem here? Grain was later to be an acceptable sacrifice before our king. It is my suspicion, although it doesn't directly say it here, that it was Cain's heart condition in the offering that he brought that made it unacceptable. I see that because he's directly related to Adam and Eve. And although we have no record of this, why would they bring a sacrifice if it had not been something that Yahweh had communicated to Adam and Eve in the garden? Why would he do that? Why would he have that action? And why bring the firstborn of the flock? So there's a couple of questions there that make us think maybe they understood that maybe Yahweh had communicated what he desired from them as a sacrifice. And that if Cain's sacrifice was not acceptable, that's because he had done the R word. Where's Hazel? Hazel knows what the R word is. Rebellion. He had known what was expected of him, and he had chosen not to do it. Yahweh had given a clear expectation. We see Abel's offering was acceptable. He brought the firstborn of his flock. He brought the fat of the offering. So we already see in Genesis chapter 4 those two details being offered, that we know what our king desires. And knowing what your king desires and bringing what has been asked is the first step to having a successful heart condition. That's what sets your heart apart. I know what my king wants, and I'm going to choose to do it. Let's go back a little further. Chapter 3. We're almost at the beginning of the book again. Now I have the law, Pastor Deborah, the law of first use. We're going to go back to the law of first sin. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which Jehovah had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of any tree in the garden? And when the woman said unto the serpent, Of the fruit of the tree of the garden we may eat. But the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, You shall not eat of it, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. And the serpent said unto the woman, You shall not surely die. We've heard that before. Same thing Korah did. Twisting the words of our king to have a meaning other than what was intended. All the nation are holy. I can take over here and be the high priest too. You can step over here and have the same understanding of God. That's actually why he doesn't want you to do that. Because he knows that if you know that, you'll be the same of God. And he just doesn't want you to do that. So why don't you go ahead and try it, and we'll just see what happens. That wily serpent. Same sin. Twisting the words of God, changing the heart condition of the person who was listening. And the serpent said unto the woman, You shall surely not die, for God doth know that in the day you eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and you shall be as God. That was not true. Because she did die, knowing good and evil. Did I put that one twice? Yep. There we go. I want to go back even further. We see that Eve brought sin into this world, but she is not the original reason that there is sin in this world. And it's funny, because the sin that brought sin into this world, the serpent who caused there to be sin in this world, committed the exact same sin that Korah committed. When I began to really think about that, it was just, so that means that this is the most, you know how all of this world, they're obsessed with like these ancient evils and stuff. This was the original ancient evil, the original ancient spirit of sin that brought destruction upon this world. We learned it about in Ezekiel chapter 28. It talks here about the king of Tyre, but it's pretty clear to understand that he's talking about Satan. And it says, "And again the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, take up a lamentation over the king of Tyre, and say to him, Thus saith the Lord God, you had the seal of perfection." That means you were presentable before the king in heaven, holding the position of probably high priest. He was the one in heaven who had the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. It's definitely somebody who was blessed by our king. You were in Eden, the set-apart place of our king, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering. So I think about snakes today, and I've seen some really beautiful snakes. This description that he goes into here and the colors of the different stones, it came to mind. Every precious stone was your covering: the ruby, the topaz, the diamond, the beryl, the onyx and jasper, the lapis lazuli, and the turquoise and the emerald. I just think of all those stones in a pile. It would be just an incredible amount of not only reflecting back the light, which is where you know where the light comes from. All stones reflect back light that is given to them. They have no light of their own. But the amount of color that would come back, it would be such a beautiful picture. And the gold, the workmanship of your settings and your sockets was in you. On the day that you were created, they were prepared for you. You were the anointed cherub who covers, and I, talking about the Father, placed you there. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked in the midst of the stones of fire. This is a description of Satan? That was a position of honor and perfection and beauty that he held. Now, when we think about Satan, we don't necessarily think of a position of beauty and honor. But that's where he came from. That's what was in him. That's who our king had set a place for him to be. That was his position within that tree of genealogy. He says, I'm going to put you here in that place of honor. Now, do you think our king would choose to put somebody who was just dumb, unwise, foolish into that position? No, I'm quite sure that his intellect, his thinking ability was profound. So going on, it says, you were blameless in your ways from the day that you were created. We're going to go back to that phrase, until your heart condition changed. That's why I say it's all about what's in your heart. Until unrighteousness was found in you. By the abundance of your trade, you were internally filled with violence. So what was in his heart came out. And you sinned. Therefore I have cast you as profane from the mountain of God, and I have destroyed you, O covering cherub. From the midst of the stones of fire, your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom by reasons of your splendor, and I cast you to the ground. I put you before kings that they may see you. So he cast him out and he cast him to the earth. By the multitude of your iniquities in unrighteousness of your trade, you profaned the sanctuaries. In a little while, we'll see that that's the same thing that the 250 princes who followed Korah into sin, that's what they did. They profaned the sanctuary of our king. Therefore, I have brought fire from the midst of you. It has consumed you. We're going to see that in a minute too. And I have turned you to ashes on the earth in the eyes of all who see you. All who know you among the peoples are appalled at you. You have become terrified, and you will cease to be forever. Now, before I say too much more about that, I read that because we're going to see the punishment that happened to Satan continuously done to everyone who commits the same sin. Our God is consistent. That's one thing in my life I have definitely learned about my King. He's consistent. If he says it's going to be some way, and I screw up, he's going to do what he said he was going to do. And as a father, let me tell you, that is my example in who I try to be. Right, Tito? Do I do what I say I'm going to do? Yeah. But I had to learn. I had to learn to be that way. It's not my nature. And sometimes I do have mercy. But I have to go back and remember my King had mercy on me, but he also had expectations. And when I lift up my face in rebellion against my King, this is the consequence that he has consistently done to people in that place. He says, by the multitude of your iniquities. No, we went that one already. Satan's fall. Isaiah. We get to hear a little bit about what he said to Yahweh our King when he got out of line. Ooh, this is kind of scary. So hold on to your britches. We're going to read it here. You ready? When the Lord will have compassion. Now, this is the other interesting part. This verse is talking about a day yet to come. This verse is talking about, I think, our generation. If you go back and read the verses before this, you will hear what he's going to do for us. We're actually starting from verse 1. When the Lord will have compassion on Jacob, and again choose Israel, and settle them in their own land. That is the day we're looking forward to. Then strangers will join to them and attach themselves to the house of Jacob. That's me. The people will take them along and bring them to their place, and the house of Israel possesses them in an inheritance in the land of the Lord as male servants and female servants. That's my place. And they will take their captors captive and will rule over the oppressors. And it will be in the day when the Lord gives you rest from your pain and turmoil and harsh service in which you have been enslaved, that you will take up this taunt against the king of Babylon and say, how the oppressor has ceased and how fury has ceased. They will respond, this is going down a little bit to verse 10. This is Satan's, we're going to see Satan's response back to Yahweh and why he fell. They will all respond and say to you, even you have been made weak as we. You have become like us. Your pomp and the music of your harps. So we get a little glimpse into his job in heaven. The music of his harps have been brought down to hell, to Sheol. Maggots are spread out as your bed beneath you, and worms are your covering. How you have fallen from heaven, O star of the morning, son of the dawn. You have been cut down to the earth, you who have weakened the nations. But you said in your heart, and we get to hear what he said to the king, I will ascend into heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God, and I will sit on the mount of the assembly in the recesses of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. Remember Eve? And you will know good and evil. You will be like God. That was the same way he tricked Eve. Nevertheless, you will be thrust down into Sheol, to the recesses of the pit. Those who see you will gaze at you. They will ponder over you, saying, is this the man who made the earth tremble and shook the kingdoms? Now we're going to go backwards. We're going to start back from Eve, and we're going to work our way forwards back to Korah, and we're going to see how the consequences that they faced were the same as the consequence that Satan faced. And Jehovah said to God, behold, the man is become as one of us, to know good and evil. And now let he put forth his hand and also take of the tree of life and eat and live forever. Therefore Jehovah sent him forth from the Garden of Eden, just as he had sent forth Satan. Remember, Satan was in the Garden of Eden, and then he kicked him out down to the earth. Same thing happened to Adam and Eve. They were kicked out of the Garden of Eden to the ground, to till the ground from whence he was taken. So this is Adam and Eve's punishment. So he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the garden the cherubim and the flame of a sword, which turned every way to keep the way of the tree of life. The tree of life gives life eternal. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil makes us to understand. I'm still not exactly sure what it does, but we see the consequences of it here. Had they eaten of the tree of life, they would have had both. And that would have made them like God, which is why God protected that. Let's go look at Cain's fall. It's funny, as I kept going through this, it's like, wow, it's the exact same thing over and over again. Now, you are cursed from the ground, he says to Cain, which has opened up his mouth. Same thing back to Isaiah. And the earth split open and opened up his mouth, and you fell into it. You are cursed from the ground, which has opened up its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hands. When you cultivate the ground, it will no longer yield its strength to you. You will be a vagrant and the wanderer in the earth. Let's go look at Korah's fall and see what happened to him. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the congregation, saying, go back from around the dwellings of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. There were those two brothers that followed along with what Korah was saying and were stepping out of line, saying, and I'm sure as they watched Korah trying to step up as the priesthood, that they were going to be the other branch and they were going to be the kinghood. They were going to take those two seats of authority because they were the original firstborn, and they were going to step into that authority. With the elders of Israel following him, and he spoke to the congregation, saying, depart now from the tents of these wicked men and touch nothing that belongs to them, or you will be swept away in all their sin. So they got back from around the dwellings of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. And Dathan and Abiram came out and stood at the doorway of their tents, along with their wives and their sons and their little ones. Remember we had the kids up here with the fathers? I can just picture that with their wives, a whole family tree. It's like that entire family tree we saw back there a little while ago. Every single one of the generations that are alive would have been standing there because our king knew that our fruit watched what had happened. And just like these two who were fruit of their father, and his father only had the firstborn status taken away. But now 2 generations later, we're seeing the same sin crop up. And God just takes the whole lineage away. He wipes out their whole lineage. They will no longer have an inheritance among the king. And I know you were talking about nations earlier committing sins. And we mentioned that. And it made me think, and I wanted to say, God is so merciful. And he allows us to make our mistakes and be restored. And I think he allows nations to make their mistakes and choose to be restored or not. Just like he did for Nineveh when they repented and threw themselves on their face before him. They were saved. And I'm going to forget it because I'm going off the cuff without my scriptures. But when Abraham went down into Egypt, the people that were in charge of the land hadn't completed, the Amalekites or the Amorites, which one is it? Anyways, the people that were possessing the land were there. And it was the promised land, and Abraham knew it. Even from that date, that land was set aside. But as they went down, he says, for the time of their sin has not yet been complete. They're going to do all this sin, and they're going to make themselves an abomination to the earth, and I will go in and destroy them. But their time's not yet. See that? He gave time for it to happen. He allowed them to allow their sin to complete itself. He knew that he would give them to an opportunity to repent, and they wouldn't. And then he would righteously be able to destroy them. Beware of the nation that turns against God. So we're here in Korah. Get back from the dwellings of Korah. Them and all of their families were standing in the doorway of their tents. Moses said, "By this you shall know that the Lord has sent me, that I come with the authority of my king to stand in the place where I stand, to do these deeds, for it is not my doing. If these men die the death of all men, or if they suffer the fate of all men, then the Lord has not sent me." Took me a little while to explain that to Hazel and Tito. I didn't understand it quite the first time through either. But he's saying, if they die naturally, then God is not with me. If they have a heart attack someday, or the Lord takes them in his time, then the Lord is not with me. But if something supernatural happens here today that cannot happen unless the hand of God speaks, then you will know that the Lord is with me. And that's what he says. He tells them their fate. And it's the same fate that they shared with Satan, because they had known what was right and turned against God. Then you shall understand that these men had spurned the Lord. Oh, wait, we didn't read the punishment. But if the ground opens up its mouth and swallows them up with it all that is theirs, and they descend alive into Sheol, then you will understand that these men have spurned the Lord, that their sin was against the Lord. As he finished speaking all these words, right there in that instant, the ground that was under them split open, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up, and their households, and all the men who belonged to Korah and their possessions, so that they and all their belongings went down alive into Sheol. And the earth closed over them, and they perished from the midst of the assembly. The 250 princes, we saw this once already. Moses, I didn't read this part, but Moses had instructed them to bring their fire and come and stand before the tabernacle. And they followed his direction. And verse 35 says, of these 250, that the fire came out and consumed them as they were offering their incense. So again, they assumed and they were punished. This is the same thing that happens to Aaron's two sons. So it's not something that's without precedent. It's again also something that we saw happened, or will happen, prophesied, to Satan. We're getting all the way through chapter 16. You know, this like I said, this is my birthday portion, and there is so I'd never studied it this deep, and as I studied it, I was like, I do not know which way to go with this. There are so many interesting things. I decided to focus on this because for me, this was the one that I think most changed my life, that most gave me a direction, that helped me understand how much my heart condition affected my everyday life, that it affected every decision that I made. But on the next day, all the congregation of the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, saying, "You are the one who have caused the death of the Lord's people." So they blamed Moses. They didn't get scared when they saw people from their midst literally have a miracle happen and them get swallowed up. They're blaming Moses for the punishment of the two people that got swallowed up. So now we see the heart congregation of the people. And it came about, however, when the congregation had assembled against Moses and Aaron, that they turned towards the tent of meeting, and behold, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. Then Moses and Aaron came out in front of the tent of meeting, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Get away from amongst this congregation, that I may consume them instantly." And Moses and Aaron fell on their faces. My dad pointed out to me a very interesting parallel. And I was deciding where to put it in. I think this is where it's going to be. Moses is a representation of our Messiah, of Yeshua. He's a messianic figure in leading over Israel. And we see a parallel here between our Messiah and the role that he played and Moses. Because Moses was our high priest, and our Messiah will also be our high priest. And just as Messiah today stands before the congregation, defending us before the Father in heaven as our judge, so Moses stands right here before the congregation. This isn't what you said, but I'll get back to that in a minute. He defends us before the Father. And Moses said to Aaron, "Take your censer and put in it fire from the altar and lay incense on it and bring it quickly to the congregation to make atonement for them." That is what our Heavenly Father, Yeshua, did for us when he died. He made atonement for us. So we see that picture right here. "For the wrath has gone forth from the Lord, and the plague has already begun." That's a scary thought, that there's a moment when the plague has already begun. His judgment is going out, and we are in desperate need at the point of dying for salvation. That's where I find myself today. That's when I recognize my own consequences of my own heart condition today. So then Aaron took it as Moses had spoken and ran into the midst of the assembly. For behold, the plague had begun among the people. So he put the incense and made atonement for the people, and he took it to stand between the dead and the living, so that the plague was checked. Now there were several million people, I think, in Israel at this point, and 14,700 of them died between the time that Aaron went to get the incense from the altar and to run to stand. But that was his heart's desire as priest over the tribe of Israel. Now each of the men in our congregation is a priest over their household. And our heart's desire is to run, to protect our families and to stand over them. And I love that our King is consistent to that place of authority, that he respected that incense, that offering that came from our high priest and Aaron standing between him and the congregation, just as he respects the sacrifice of our Messiah, Yeshua, and the sacrifice that he made. I told you I was going to jump back, and I want to do it now, to Dathan and Abiram. Because they had a point that the grumble of the people, because they were leaders over the people. Remember that they were going to be the kings? They were the firstborn line, right? This was what my dad brought out. Their complaint against Moses was this. Because even after all the other part, they were complaining, and they said, Moses sent a summons to Dathan and Abiram, who would have been his uncles, of a sense. So they were of an older generation, a generation, although not directly in authority over him. They would have definitely been his in a sense, superiors age-wise. So he summons to Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, but they said, "We will not come up. Is it not enough that you have brought us out of a land flowing with milk and honey, to have us die in the wilderness?" Because they had just been told last week that the whole generation was not going to go into the promised land, that they would be condemned to wander 40 years in the wilderness and not go up. "Is it not enough that you have brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey, to have us die in the wilderness? But you would also lord it over us? Indeed, you have not brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey, nor have you given us an inheritance of fields and vineyards. Would you put out the eyes of these men? We will not come up." So they were in rebellion against the authority that Yahweh had put over them. They didn't come up. They recognized their punishments, and their hearts were hardened. And that's why I believe they received the same punishment as Israel, or as Korah. And my father, this is the parallel that my father pointed out. They were expecting to come out of Egypt and go into the promised land. There was an expectation that they would be going into the promised land. Because of their sin, because of their heart condition that we saw last week, they thought it would be too hard. They didn't trust their king. That the sin of the nation caused them to not go up. So now they're saying that we're not going to be obedient because we don't like the consequences. But my father pointed out that it was this understanding, this same heart condition that was happening also in Messiah's time, which was brought the question of his disciples, Lord, at this time, Acts 1:6, although it mentions several other times, at this time, are you restoring the kingdom to Israel? Well, we're here at the point of establishing the kingdom of Israel before it had happened. But that's why they're asking, are you at this time going to restore the kingdom? And we were talking about it and Judas very well may have been pressuring Jesus and putting him in a position to have to stand up against these darn Romans because I want you to establish your kingdom now. And that's why he put him in the position that he did. That's why he betrayed him to the Romans, so that he would have to take up his position as king. But that's not what he came to do at that point. And when Judas understood what he had done, he took the consequences of the action in his own life. He hung himself. But I always wondered why Judas would betray Jesus. And if you think about it in this light, that he was trying to force, he was trying to manipulate, he was trying to get out of his place and force Messiah to restore the kingdom at this time as his desire. And maybe if I just help him along a little bit, I'll put him in a position where he has to make a choice or die. I will cause him to establish his kingdom. I know it'll happen if he's in that place. And he laid down his life instead, because he had his plan all along. I wanted to take this into what's expected of us, because each one of us has an expectation over our lives. Each one of us has a place in that family tree. Whether we're the sons of Korah standing next to him as he's swallowed up because of the sins of our fathers, whether we're Moses and Aaron, whether we're one of the children of Israel grumbling against our king, each one of us has been given a responsibility. And we have a heart condition that's going to determine what we are going to do with the responsibility that we've been given. And this is one of my favorite parables of Jesus, of Yeshua. He says, "For it is just like a man about to go on a journey who called his own slaves and entrusted his possessions to them. To one he gave 5 talents, and another 10, or to another, each one according to his own ability." Each one according to his ability. The talents. Now that doesn't say anything about his heart condition. Just like Satan, all the way back before he fell, he had been given a place, an authority, an ability to bring worship to the king, wisdom and beauty. These are all talents. He had the choice on how he was going to use them. And he used them for a time until he made the choice. He made the choice to sin until sin came into his heart and he acted on it. Immediately, the one who had received 5 talents went out and traded with them and gained 5 more talents. In the same manner, the one who had received 2 talents gained 2 more. But he who received 1 talent went away, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. Now, do you think that he did that because he had no talent? That's my question to you. Did he have talent? Let me tell you, when our King sees something within you that he's willing to put his stamp on and invest in, it doesn't matter what you think. It matters what your King thinks. So if you find yourself in a place where you're in this building, and let me tell you, I told you last week that there is not a person who is in this building who is not here, but that the Spirit of our King has touched something inside their spirit. I promise you that. I told the testimony last week about the woman who came up into the gas station and said to me, "Are those tallits on your belt? Are you Jewish?" And I'm like, "No." And she's like, and we got into this whole long conversation about who I am. Hold on a second. And she started to share her testimony with me. And I stopped her and I said, before you say what you're going to say, I can already tell you what you're going to say, because it is by the Spirit of my King that you have been brought to the place where you are. And I told her testimony, and then she told me her testimony. And the one thing that I heard is something that is in so many times. Robert, the family that has been coming, they've been on vacation and his wife's been sick, but I talked to them this week and they're going to see us soon. Many other in this congregation. The Spirit of God spoke to her and asked her and says, "Why aren't you following my ways? You see my Sabbaths. You see my..." And she started because of following the feasts. Can I raise your hands? How many in here started Torah because of that same, the Spirit of God starting something in your life? Everybody. Yeah. It is a universal testimony. It wasn't because you heard somebody. It was because the Spirit of God started doing something in your own life that you were brought forth. He recognized the talent in you. Not you. You didn't have anything to do with it. He recognized the talent in you. And because he gave you that talent, he invested in you. So we go on in the parable. I wrote up there, we have been given a responsibility with the expectation that we are going to multiply it. How many of us have been given talents, monetarily or otherwise, and failed to go out and put them to work for the benefit of our master? That is what is our responsibility to do. That is what is expected of us. That is what our parent told us to do. Are we the servant with one talent who went and buried it in the ground? The sin of presumption would say that to suppose that something is the case on the basis of probability before any proof, to take for granted that something exists or is the case. That's what happened there. He was afraid. He presumed that if he lost the money that his master would be angry. That was his sin of presumption. That was the same sin that Korah had. He presumed. Korah presumed to have authority that he didn't have. This servant presumed that his master would be angry if he didn't prosper with what he had been given. And the one that received the one talent, this is the end of the story, said, "Master, I knew you were a hard man." I'm going to skip the little part. We all know what happened in that parable, right? 5 talents became 10, 2 talents became 4. The people that went out and did and did their labor with the talent that they had been given multiplied. The one who didn't, now we find out what happened. The one who didn't go out and multiply, buried it in the ground, his master was angry. And he said, "Master, I knew that you were a hard man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering what you had, where you had scattered no seed. And I was afraid." He had presumed, and he was afraid. I'm standing here because I was afraid, but I did it anyways. Let me tell you, Pastor Deborah, I am thankful for the opportunity to be here. It is an honor to be here. And I know, as she said to me the other day, we protect this podium, and we protect the people that speak here. So I am humbled to stand here, let me tell you. But I was afraid too, but I didn't bury that talent. I said, I'll get up here and give it a try. I'll do it anyways, even though I'm afraid. See, you have what is yours. But his master answered to him and said, you wicked, lazy slave, you knew that I reap where I did not sow and gathered where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have put my money in the bank, and upon my arrival I would have had interest. Oh, therefore he got in trouble. And they take away everything that he had. And then we hear these same words that we've heard from Cain and from Eve and from Satan. Throw out that worthless slave into the outer darkness, in that place where there will be a weeping and gnashing of teeth. Separation from the kingdom of God. That is a very strong punishment. Our Father's kingdom operates on order. There is a way that things are supposed to happen. He has put each one of us with our talents in our place. It is our heart condition that will determine whether we take that talent, whether we take what he has put in us and put it to the use that he determined for it. That's our choice. His whole universe is in its order for his purpose. All creation honors their appointed positions. Some people are appointed as priests, some as a gift to assist others, and some as teachers. There are diversities of gifts, but the same Spirit is in all of them. And that's the Spirit that our King put there. There are differences in ministries, but the same Lord. And there are diversities of activities, but it is the same God who works in all of us. We are all holy as a nation, even though some of us are in our place and others of us are in our place over here. Each one of us has our place. In God's kingdom, there are many different talents. Your giftings appears as fruit in your walk when you set yourself apart. Now, I don't get to set myself apart today and not set myself apart tomorrow. This is a continually setting us apart. By pursuing our bridegroom, our king, and fulfilling the covenant that we made with him, following Torah. That's how we show our king that we love him. To honor or obey his Torah, his boundaries, his protocols, his will, his order, and his commandments. That is how we set ourselves apart. That is what he calls holy. That's what he says is acceptable in his presence. Otherwise, without holiness, our gifting, even though we have it, serves no purpose. It is buried in the ground. I'm almost closing. Do you know that those who run in a race at all, but only one receives the prize? This is quoting Paul from 1 Corinthians 9:24. I love this idea because you know marathon runners. It's a 26-mile race. This is a lifelong race. Do you get to choose which parts of the race you're going to run? You say, I'm only going to run miles 3 through 6, and then I'm going to skip, and then I'm going to run miles 4 through 7 or 9 through 17. No, it's the whole race. The whole race is your life, is your opportunity to show your king how you are going to be holy. You can't skip parts of it and say, for this part, I know what I'm supposed to do, but I'm not going to do it. That's not acceptable. You will not win the race that way. There is an expectation. Your king has an expectation for you. Run in such a way that you may win. Everyone who competes in the games exercises control in all things. They then do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we run to receive an imperishable prize, our eternal salvation. Therefore, I run in such a way as not without aim. He has a fighting metaphor here. I box in such a way as not to be punching the air. If I'm going to hit something, I'm going to hit what I'm hitting at and not just, try and hit the air in front of me. I'm going to fight against something. But I discipline my body and make it my slave so that after I have preached to others, I might not be disqualified. This was really interesting to me. Because it went all the way back to Cain. And this was the warning that God gave to Cain before he killed his brother. And I thought that was really interesting. Yahweh knew what he was going to do, and he gave him a warning. And I wanted to leave us today with this warning. Cain knew what was expected of him. He knew what offering was acceptable before his king. And it was either his heart condition or the offering that his heart condition caused him to bring that made his offering unacceptable before his king. He knew what was right, and he didn't do it. This is the warning that Yahweh, our king, gave to him before he went out and murdered his brother, because he was angry at what had happened. He says this. He says, if you do what is right. My dad and I went through this verse or letter or word by word in Hebrew, and it's so interesting. If you do well, will not your countenance be lifted up? Will not your king give you a higher rank? We have ranks here for our youth, right? Will not your rank go up if you do what you know is right? You will be exalted. If you do what is expected of you by your king, will you not have intimacy with your father because you chose to do what is right? And if you do not, well, we know what's outside the door, he says. Crouching outside the door, waiting for you, is sin. So what Korah chose, he knew what was right. He knew his position. He knew what was expected. And he decided to exalt himself, just as Satan had exalted himself out of his position to try and take on God. And he says, sin is there waiting for you, and its desires to consume you, to destroy you. It's for you. But you must master it. Cain failed the test, and he had to take the consequences. Korah failed the test, and he was swallowed alive. Satan failed the test and was thrown from heaven, and in so doing so deceived Eve, created in God's image, and caused sin to become a part of all mankind. And so each one of us today has to take a choice to understand that there is a consequence for our heart condition. That's a hard message. And it's one that, being my birthday portion, I was really like, ouch. But let me tell you, I can bear testimony time and time again in my life that when I have sinned the sin of presumption, I have assumed authority that was not mine, that I have paid the consequences every time, because there is one thing that my Father is consistent about. That's giving me the consequences that I deserve. That doesn't mean he doesn't love me. That means that he desires to bring me back, to teach me, to love me when I call out to him. He desires for me to master the sin that is waiting outside the door for me. That's my prayer for each of us today, that we would recognize, that I would recognize, it's my prayer for myself, that I would recognize when I begin to step outside my place of authority, that I would recognize when I begin to presume things that are not mine to presume, that I would guard my heart condition, that I would protect the things that I love, that I will stay in the place and the talent that my king has given to me. That's my job. My king has given me a place. I got to look for it and seek it out and be prosperous with the talents that he has given me. That's my place. And if I remember that and I don't forget it, then he will bless me. Then I will prosper. Because that is my king's desire for me. If you are intimate with your king, if you follow his ways, when you get to that day in judgment, it talks about that just after this parable. You can go read it in Matthew 24. The people that had done this, he said, when I was naked, you clothed me. When I was poor, you fed me. And they said, when did we do that? All we did was follow Torah, and we're obedient. But in doing that, in following his commands, you do take care of those people. That is your obligation. That is your responsibility to your community. And in doing the things that we are learning right now, it will change who you are so that you won't even realize that you are being the hands of God. All you are doing is being obedient. And that's our heart's condition. That's our heart condition. That's the desire that he has for us. Every one of our places is going to be different. Every one of our jobs is going to be different. But it's our job to be obedient and consistent to what he has given us to do. So if that concludes what I wanted to say, if you guys would stand, I would love for you guys to join me in a closing prayer. Father, I ask for a blessing upon your congregation who is assembled here today. That we would be people who are drawn to you, that you have put your spirit in each one of us to do a job, as evidenced by them desiring to seek the truth of your words, desiring to seek the truth of your Torah, and loving you with a whole heart. Father, I ask that you would open our eyes to places where we may fall short, and to give us a smile and a hug and a mercy as we run to you when we realize that we have sinned and ask for your forgiveness. That we would not be like Korah in judging and saying, I am better than those who you have put in authority over me. Father, as we read your Torah and we study your Torah and we realize and we look forward to the days that are coming where you will reestablish your kingdom on this earth. Just as in Acts 1:6, it said, at this time will you establish your kingdom. Father, that day is near. Father, your spirit in us is witness to that day being near. A hunger for intimacy with you is a witness. Father, I pray that repentance would sweep over this land just as it swept over Nineveh. That, Father, that the people that you have set apart for yourself would be drawn out. That your angels would go through the fields, bringing in the harvest, Father. That you would touch the spirits of the lives of the people around us. And that, Father, that the people in this congregation will be instruments to give family and community to those people as you draw them out. That we would be available to bear testimony for the joy and the truth and allow for assembly for the congregation of believers, Father. That we would not allow our talents to weigh dormant, that we would not bury them in the ground, but that we would stand and be faithful for the job that you have given us. In this day, in this hour, that we would stand and be counted as tools that are in use. That we would be back and say, look at the things that I have done for my Father. Look at the works of my hands as I have dedicated everything to your service, Father. Father, just as Cain would have in that moment been able to lift up his countenance to his king, had he so chosen. Father, I pray in the moments that we are tested, that we would make wise choices in our heart conditions, that we would leave sin outside the door and have mastery over that door, that we would choose you in our daily lives and in our momentary lives, that we would run the race to completion and know that it is our intimacy with your ways and your words that will cause us to be victorious in that race. And that is the work of your Spirit, is to be our aid and our helper in our times of need and our times of weakness, Father. Father, lift up your countenance to us. Cause your face to be close to us and have mercy on us, that we will be blessed by you in this hour and this day as we seek your face. Amen.
Good evening. I hope you enjoyed today's program as much as we enjoyed having you as our guests, and just enjoyed the camaraderie and the being together. I'm so glad that you tuned in. I hope you'll tune in again. Please like us on our Facebook page. That always helps. Our website is www.oasislc.org, and you can donate if you feel so led by the Ruach HaKodesh, by the Holy Spirit, to keep us live stream on the air. Any little donation is really helpful to our ministry and to minister to those that haven't heard the word, haven't heard the words of truth. So be sure and do that if you feel led. And also, Dr. Deb Today Radio, I'm also on the radio and love to have you tune in there as well and offer any comments or suggestions. We really value your opinion. We really value your input. We consider you part of our family. Thanks again for tuning in. Shabbat Shalom.